Good morning, and once again, welcome to the 2023 ABA GPSolo Fall Conference. Welcome to KC. I hope you all are having a good time. As you know, our slogan is your success is our mission. And we really do try to meet solo and small firm attorneys where they are. Whether you're a law student contemplating a solo or small firm practice, a lawyer already in solo and small firm practice that wants to increase professional development opportunities, network, or even work to improve the profession and adopt the policies to move the profession and society in the right way. And we welcome you here. This first CLE is the lawyer's role in a time of democratic crisis. And I think this is important, and it's really important. It's really important because of the oversized role in improving our society that lawyers, judges, and legislators play. And legislators, of course, many happen to be lawyers. So we have an oversized role and oversized responsibility. We are indeed responsible for the formation of the country. You know, when you look at the Declaration of Independence, one of the reasons that we left the crown was to ensure a fair and impartial judicial system. And we've done that. 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence and 25 were lawyers. 55 delegates to the Constitutional Convention that drafted our Constitution, the longest written Constitution in history, and 32 of those folks were lawyers. And so, once again, I repeat that we as lawyers, judges, and legislators who are lawyers, we have an oversized responsibility to keep this experiment going. We were responsible for the preservation, we're responsible for the formation of our democracy, we'll be responsible for the preservation of our democracy. And here today to talk to us about lawyers' role in preserving our democracy, we have Ms. Rikleen. She is with the Lawyers Defending American Democracy. And Ms. Rikleen is the executive director and on the board of that organization. And she's also president of the Rikleen Institute for Strategic Leadership. She consults, speaks, trains, and provides expert witness services on such workplace culture topics as developing a diverse, respectful, and inclusive workplace culture, minimizing the impacts of unconscious bias, and strengthening multi-generational relationships. She is the author of 3 books. One we have here today, and we'll tell you how we're going to make that available to the participants, but it's called Her Honor Stories of Challenge and Triumph from women judges. Okay, and we're going to have some copies, and we'll tell you the exciting way that we're going to distribute those today. Also, as a added value, for 2 to 3 minutes, we're going to have Ms. Angie, Ms. Rikleen. She's with the Election Official Legal Defense Fund, and she's going around the country and recruiting volunteer attorneys that are willing to work pro bono to represent election officials and election volunteers as they face charges of, not doing their jobs of fraud, or even need protection from overzealous electors, such as restraining orders and other protections. She'll tell us where we can sign up to assist that effort. I do want to thank our sponsors once again, and I hope you've had a chance to visit them outside in the other room. And our premier sponsor, Thomson Reuters, ABA Retirement Funds, and TAP3 Software. Also, our meeting sponsors and exhibitors, ABA Insurance, ARAG Legal, Centerbase, Convert, IT Marketing, Longevity, and Rise Guys Digital Marketing. And without any further ado, I present to you Ms. Rikleen. Thank you. Thank you.
A lot to collect.
I know, right? Right.
I'm really prepared.
Thank you so much, Henry. And I'm very appreciative that to be invited here to talk about this. It's a lot of my worlds colliding because I'm really active in the ABA and a whole bunch of other roles, and running into people from those roles. It's been fun. So let me just start with, the basic fundamental premise of where we are today. And when we talk about this historic threat facing democracy today, it's truly not hyperbole. We are talking about something that is data-driven and research-driven. And everything that I do, all my writing, I have a long history as a lawyer, a former law firm partner, an author of being very careful about things that I say and what it's based on, particularly when we're talking about sensitive topics or what some people perceive as sensitive topics. There are perspectives that are shared by legal and public policy experts, historians, and increasing data that's been developed over the past few years that demonstrate this. So, for example, the World Justice Project, which is founded by former ABA President Bill Newcomb, has a globally respected rule of law index that ranks countries around the world according to specific rule of law factors. It's a really complicated but amazing set of items and in which they do this ranking, every countries included. And the next ranking for 2023 will be released next week, I believe on the 25th. But if you look at last year's index, its analysis of the prior 5 years show that the rule of law has declined on a global level. Alarmingly, authoritarian trends are continuing as checks on government powers, including oversight by the judiciary, the legislature, and the media. We'll talk about that, but all continues to decline. And the 2021 Global State of Democracy report issued by the International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance, another very respected organization internationally, has identified the United States as a backsliding democracy. Pew Research, which has monitored public trust in government for decades, reports that trust in government is now at an historic low. So these are red lights flashing at us. And the indicators, these are all indicators of why, for example, Lawyers Defending American Democracy is so passionate about the role of lawyers helping to make a difference. And that's what we're going to be talking about. So this work needs to be seen as a shared responsibility that belongs to everyone. When we talk about this issue of protecting democracy, we have to think about all of us being all in to do what we can. And as Henry said, lawyers have a particularly important role in this process. And I love having this conversation in a bar association environment, one because of my own strong roots in the bar, but I think that when we have this conversation as bar association members, we are able to remove it from a political or partisan context, and it's really critical that we do that. Our democracy depends on us, with our specialized skills and our knowledge as lawyers, to defend the underlying constitutional values and norms of behaviors that are essential to the functioning of our democratic institutions. So when we talk about these essential core norms and values, it's important to identify what they are and realize what it is we're trying to protect. Early in the formation of Lawyers Defending American Democracy, we focused on 8 essential core values and principles that are critical to a functioning democracy. They're the values that enable this country to be seen as a beacon of freedom and opportunity, and they're essential values that we think lawyers should be dedicated to preserving. Let me emphasize again, none of these core values and principles are about disagreements that people may have over party politics or ideology. Those are as old as the country. They will continue. That's not what this is about. These are about bedrock, constitutional, democratic principles and values that underlie our form of government. And talking about them is also a little helpful kind of civics reminder for us all. So I'm going to just walk through what these 8 core values and principles are and why they matter for us to get excited about and involved in. The World Justice Project states that every sector of society is a stakeholder in the rule of law. Every sector of society is a stakeholder. But what does this actually mean when we're trying to bring others on board with protecting this concept? The WJP defines the rule of law as a durable system of laws, institutions, norms, and community commitments that delivers accountability, just law, open government, and accessible and impartial justice, a system that is foundation to a respect of fundamental rights. That's a lot to be thinking about, but the focus on accountability and impartiality and how justice is administered, all of these are core elements, core functions. When the rule of law is in effect, data shows us that corruption, poverty, and disease decline, and people are protected from injustice. The concept goes back to the ratification of the Constitution and the Federalist Papers that, explain the underlying foundational principles of our government. And finally, the rule of law is the principle under which all persons, institutions, and entities are accountable to laws. The rule of law depends on laws being publicly promulgated, equally enforced, and independently adjudicated. And that's really the essence of what a lot of this conversation is about. So that's the first principle. Second, separation of powers, kind of basic for us as lawyers when we think about, con law. It's fundamental to our constitutional model that each branch of government has its own sphere of authority. But what we are seeing in the studies and the research and playing out in real time are the continuing impacts of authoritarian, having had an authoritarian leaning federal executive that's widening into authoritarian behaviors in the states. And again, not a political statement, but it is based on research looking at core principles and evolving laws and changes that are happening. Increasingly, we see state and local governments becoming the new battlegrounds for attacks on democracy and the rule of law. We at Lawyers Defending American Democracy, LDAD, have been involved over the past many months in a very intensive research project. It's only a pilot project at this point because it takes so many resources that we don't have. But we are looking at examples in states. We're starting with the 4 or 5 states and looking at what authoritarian behaviors are taking place in those states, measuring them against very specific principles that we're talking about, and looking at what specific laws have been passed that undermine those fundamental constitutional principles. So the project takes these concepts embedded in the rule and law and looks at how accountability, open government, and impartial justice are now being undermined by state actors. And this is happening increasingly around the country. Checks and balances, another core constitutional principle that we've all studied. Each branch of government has individual powers to check the other branches and to prevent any one branch from becoming too powerful. But we have seen abuses of this core principle revealed in a wide variety of books that have been written over the last number of years by various law professors around the country, looking at some of the documentation in the research done on the January 6th Commission, the fact-based information, and looking at all of the studies and the data that show the cracks in this system of institutional checks and balances that are currently taking place. And what we don't think about enough as a core fundamental value is what is happening to undermine confidence in the media and what's happening to the media right now. We know that being able to trust the facts that we get from media sources is an essential component of American democracy. How else do we learn about what is happening? And we are in an increasingly complicated world. In terms of even trying to define what the media is and whose media, and the enormous amounts of sources of information that we get, and how do we learn about what's the difference between media as media, or sources of information that are available, but may or may not be verified or true or adhere to journalistic standards. It's a complicated world right now to figure out fact from fiction. But the integrity of the press is now constantly being undermined by political attacks, including from government officials. In the past several years, we have seen candidates in states across the country running campaigns that are based on anti-media platforms, creating an atmosphere of hostility and distrust in the media. These attacks on the media by public officials have the effect of, and they're often designed to insulate government from meaningful media oversight. After all, if confidence in the media is so undermined that no one can believe what is being reported, then politicians can act with impunity because can't trust what's being written, and the whole the whole checks and balance of that part of the system is destroyed. Media attacks themselves are also resulting in dangerous threats to reporters. Assaults on journalists in the United States has skyrocketed in 2020 and then again in 2021 to unprecedented levels. In 2021, there were numerous assaults on journalists and their equipment during the January 6th Capitol attack, as well as huge spikes with attacks as a result of COVID coverage. And then again during protest demonstrations. So we see in those very fraught years, tremendous incidents of actual very dangerous attacks, physical attacks on the media. In addition, we've also seen thousands of newspapers around the country, local media, where we depend for the local coverage of what's happening in our towns, our communities, our school boards, have closed. So the result of these closures is that more communities have no reliable sources of local reporting, and that fuels further political divisions. I miss my local letter to the editors in our local paper. I mean, for all of us, that's how you figured out what was going on in the community, right? You were kind of read the news article, but then you go the letters to the editor to see who's writing what and how they're feeling. And it was a way of staying in touch with people in your community. It's very hard now. So the central pillar of our democratic system, of course, is public respect and confidence in the courts. It's essential for our justice system to be able to operate effectively. But we know there have been recent revelations about the Supreme Court, for example, that have significantly undermined trust and confidence in that institution. And this is borne out by data that shows that trust in the Supreme Court is now at an historic low point by a variety of different polling and other sources of research. One of the things that Lawyers Defending American Democracy did recently in partnership with another organization, the Project on Government Oversight, and with the help of a global law firm on a pro bono capacity, is to develop a draft code of conduct for the Supreme Court. In other words, saying we know people are talking about the need for one, but what should it look like? So we work together, we produce that draft, we put it's on both of our respective websites, as a way of saying, here's a draft for consideration. These are the kinds of things about transparencies and disclosures and recusals that a Supreme Court today ought to be thinking about. So when we know that democracy is built on the public's belief that we are getting honest information and facts from our government, at least that's the way it's supposed to work. Americans rely on that trust in making their own informed public decisions, including how we vote and how our confidence again in the justice system. What are the facts that we're being given? But if officials use misinformation, dishonesty, lies to undermine facts or to impede lawful investigations, the misinformation impacts the ability of law enforcement to do its job. And it impacts public trust in their work, and it impacts our work as lawyers. It can also interfere with efforts to hold public officials accountable, again, that word, which further harms democracy. The public has a right to believe that the criminal justice system is nonpartisan and independent, including the Department of Justice and the FBI. The foundation for that belief is a shared perception that law enforcement work is nonpartisan. When that impartiality is constantly attacked and criticized every time a prosecution is brought, when it's called into question without underlying facts, then democracy itself is undermined. And finally, in terms of looking at these core principles that are so critical, the public has a right, essential ingredients of a vibrant democracy include the ability to engage in civil discourse, for all people to be treated fairly and to be able to have, be treated with respect for their own dignity. But we are seeing a dangerous and growing white national movement taking place in America today that is seriously underlying this opportunity for this basic fundamental principle. We're also seeing civil discourse eroded through an increase in attacks on individuals simply for their visible or known characteristics, for what they believe, or for who they love. Civil discourse is being eroded by banning what can be taught and discussed in schools, rather than encouraging conversation and caring. This is a very important fundamental principle. I'm struck by the fact that the book, which Henry so kindly held up, her honor, has in it stories from such amazing women judges from around the country, including the former Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Florida, first Black woman to be in that role. The former, recently retired, known and beloved by many of us in the ABA, Bernice Donald from the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals, both of whom wrote some about their own backstory and the racism that they endured and that their families endured. And they talk about institutional racism in their chapters. And the fact of the matter is, those chapters arguably could be banned in several states now in this country. Think about that. Chapters written by some of the most esteemed judges in America right now could be banned from children reading their inspiring stories. So when we talk about these core principles, we talk about the need for these principles to rise above politics, and that protecting them is essential to our democracy and to our entire justice system. We, as in Lawyers Defending American Democracy, we were officially formed in early 2019. We are a nonpartisan 501c3 non-political organization, and we have one primary goal: galvanize lawyers to speak out and take action to defend and uphold the rule of law, the basics that we just walked through. We hold in common a shared conviction that constitutional and legal principles critical to American freedoms and democracy are at significant risk, and that all lawyers have a responsibility to respond. And 6 of our 16 board members are very active ABA leaders, myself included. Several of us are former section chairs. I chaired the Civil Rights and Social Justice section. One is a former senior staffer in the ABA, and another is a former ABA president, Martha Barnett, who's known to many of us, many of us in the ABA. We are committed to working with bar associations across the country to facilitate their engagement in the protection of democracy. So one of the things we did to try to, as a focus point for lawyers, is this came up with this concept of asking lawyers to agree to take one or more measures to help protect democracy, do something. And so we created something called the Democracy Commitment, which is just a sign-on document that lists key principles that lawyers must protect, and then suggests a variety of ways that lawyers can do this and to make a difference, and how they can make a difference in taking these actions. The document is meant to be a blueprint for action that lawyers can then customize to their own use. It's not saying, go do this, go do that. It's saying, if you sign it, it's like, I'm committed to helping on these fundamental principles. And I'm going to be able to adjust what I'm doing within my own communities, my own states. One key principle noted in the democracy commitment is the right to free and fair elections. And of course, when we protect elections, we are protecting them not as partisans on behalf of candidates. People do that, of course. That's not what we're about. But as activists on behalf of democracy. And that is a fundamental distinction. As stated in the democracy commitment, the rule of law depends on free and fair elections, where we can rely on laws that apply fairly across all parties and racial groups, indeed, all communities. Impartiality in the vote counting, accurate reporting of the vote count. So those two go hand in hand. You got to trust what the count is. You got to trust how it's reported. And then the ability to resolve disputes in the courts and not through intimidation, threats, or violence. And I'm just struck because when I was thinking about these principles and writing about that, I was thinking about Angie, who will be speaking to you for just a couple of minutes about the election network that she is helping to run, which galvanizes lawyers to protect just that. As an example of the dangers facing our election system, a study by the Brennan Center found that restrictive voting laws that have been promulgated in the past years are most prevalent in states where there are significant non-white populations, now at risk of losing their right to vote. And those restrictive voting laws are increasing. They are not decreasing. We have documented this in our own state compendium that I just mentioned that we will be publicizing soon, as well as noting a direct correlation between voter suppression methods and their impacts on communities of color. So we hold a special obligation to society to use our status, our skills, our legal expertise, and our convening authority to protect the rule of law, the values of our democratic institutions, and our justice system. Moreover, for almost every state, and for those of us who are members of a federal court bar, our oath requires this engagement. And I've come across some really interesting and wonderful articles that, in bar journals that probably disappear, that people don't read, but that actually talk about what the lawyer's oath is and what does that mean for all of us. And I think we should all be doing more writing and researching about that in particular. Bar associations have a convening authority that can be so helpful in this kind of work. We can engage each other and collaborate with civic and governmental leaders on fundamental, non-political, nonpartisan efforts to protect democracy. So, for example, this can be accomplished by rejecting and repudiating verbal or physical intimidation or coercive measures against any officials or candidates, helping to restore civility and honesty in public discourse, ensuring that everyone is provided with equal access to voting and that they're treated with dignity in that process, and promoting the rule of law by insisting on accountability for lawyers who violate their oath. So our ask is very tailored, as I said. The laws are rapidly changing around the country. Restrictive measures are continually being promoted and passed to impede access to the ballot box and to replace independent election officials with partisan actors. I can't recall whether it was just the New York Times or Washington Post that just did an article pointing out the alarming drain of independent election workers and officials that are leaving in droves because they feel endangered doing their role. This exodus of nonpartisan local election workers is threatening to our fundamental system of voting. If experienced officials are walking away because of threats and intimidation, what does that leave by way of our trust and confidence in what remains in our voting system? Lawyers can mobilize in accordance with the needs of where they live, and they can practice to not only try to protect these workers, as Angie will talk about, but perhaps to even step in and help fill some of these roles. I was struck by Henry's reading of the lawyer count in so many formative points in our democracy. And yet the sad part is, if you look at data more recently about lawyers in the public roles in this country, it is horribly decreased. It's a much fewer lawyers in Congress, in legislatures, in key local roles. I personally, as someone who loves my profession, I'm very pleased to be able to say, I think part of the problem we're seeing in civil discourse in this country today, in some of what is happening, is we don't have enough lawyers running for office. We don't have enough lawyers to undertaking these kinds of roles. So I'd like to motivate some of you in this room to go home and run for something, because I think it doesn't matter what your politics are. You think like a lawyer, you can have civil discourse like a lawyer, and that can make such a fundamental difference. So again, as a bar association in your state and local affiliate bars, think about, how do you encourage stakeholder dialogue? Can you create some community conversations, different conferences, business community involvement? Can you develop an action plan in conjunction with a local chamber of commerce or other kinds of Rotary clubs, other business roundtables? Every organization, going back to the definition of the rule of law, every organization is a stakeholder in protecting our elections, protecting the rule of law, caring about whether media and public officials are under attack, and whether we can count on honesty and integrity from our government officials. The other thing is to think about ways to develop partnerships with local schools to teach about democracy and civic engagement, because that's another thing that we see in the research, how much less teaching is going on in schools these days about these basic fundamental principles. And so what we hope is that our goal, or our role rather, as lawyers defending American democracy, is to be a resource to individuals and to bars around the country, to help come up with programming ideas, develop toolkits, curricula, background documents. We want to be able to work as partners in this effort. And for those of you who are, maybe coming from a mandatory bar, we don't think that the, Keller versus State Bar of California decision is the prohibition that people think it is for all things relating to the kinds of issues we're talking to today. We prepared, and it's available on our website at ldad.org, a detailed memorandum that analyzed the Keller decision and related cases to show how mandatory bars can engage in these nonpartisan efforts to protect democracy within the bounds of Keller and other cases. The essential point is that a valid argument can be made that these issues are in fact germane to a bar's core function, and they relate to improving the quality of legal services that are available. So the key takeaway, I hope, on this point will be, people cannot make something political simply by saying it is. And yet we see this happen all the time. People, call something politics that aren't politics. This work is not about being political. I can't really say that enough. And if we continue to speak as lawyers in the core values of our constitutional democracy, we can remain nonpartisan and above the fray. And I'll just say something from a straight bar association advocacy role. As somebody who cares deeply about bars, I'm a former president of the Boston Bar Association. I understand the issues around member engagement and trying to make sure that young members find the bar a viable place to join. And in my other life, I have spent years writing about and conducting trainings that focus on strengthening generational relationships, as well as on workplace culture. That's one of the other books that Henry mentioned that I've written. Research shows that there is a direct relationship between meaning and work. People want the opportunity to make a difference by adding value in some way, to know that what they do matters. This is fundamentally true in the research for all of us, but it's particularly true when we look at data for younger generations. A study reported in the Harvard Business Review showed that across all generations, people are motivated by being able to make a difference to society. For example, nearly half of all workers said that they would take a 15% pay cut to work for an organization with an inspiring purpose. Younger people are increasingly demonstrating their concern about seeking meaning at work. Bar associations are uniquely positioned to offer what workplaces may simply be unable to provide. By taking such measures as connecting lawyers to their core values, providing opportunities to do work that matters, helping lawyers feel recognized for what they're doing, giving lawyers voice, and providing opportunities to work with other supportive lawyers on other projects that are important to society. This data about people seeking meaningful work, by the way, actually increased significantly during and since the pandemic. So for lawyers, protecting democracy is as important and meaningful as it gets. For me, having served in many bar leadership roles, I've been on the ABA Board of Governors, as I mentioned, a former president of the Boston Bar. I've worked closely with young lawyers in many of my bar roles. I am convinced that efforts to protect democracy can also help bar associations increase in their engagement and increase membership. So I will stop here. I want to make sure we have time for we do have time for questions, but I'm going to invite Angie Pitha to come up and tell us for a minute or two about a very significant way that lawyers in a very nonpartisan, non-political form of engagement can assist with respect to the elections. Thank you. And as soon as she's done, I'll pop back up and hopefully we can have some discussion about these issues.
Thank you so much, Lauren. It's such a pleasure to be here and see you all this morning. My name is Angie Pitha. I am the project lead of the, get ready, it's long, Election Official Legal Defense Network. We're a project of the nonpartisan organization, the Center for Election Innovation and Research. We were founded in the aftermath of the attack on the Capitol in order to address the growing threat to election officials that Lauren talked about in her presentation. I first want to give a major shout out to lawyers defending American democracy. I made Lauren's acquaintance last year, and they were kind enough to send out a note on behalf of my project, EOLDN, as we call it, because it's long, to encourage lawyers to learn more about our mission, which is matching pro bono attorneys with election officials who are under attack simply for running free and fair elections, as Lauren pointed out. I personally am a signatory to the democracy commitment, and I strongly suggest that all of you sign it and also subscribe to their newsletter, because you get calls to action on how you can add your name to very important initiatives that help preserve the rule of law. So I wanted to certainly stress how important her organization is and the work that she's done. I want to first reiterate as strongly as possible her points, and there were so many of them that I have to pick the correct ones, because they're all correct, but like the ones that I don't have enough time to ramble on. So protecting democracy is not political. It is not partisan. And by extension, election administrators are not political, are not partisan, run their elections year after year in their nonpartisan professional capacities, and only recently have been targeted by some elements of the populace. They are extremists, and they believe, for one reason or another, but often it is the mis, dis, and malinformation that we see in the media and by public officials, which is a very sad state of affairs, but that perpetuate the belief, which is not true, that election administration has fraud inside of it, that it is fraudulent. And as a result of this narrative, people in their communities are getting mad at their election officials, the people who run the elections. They're taking it out on the election officials. You may have seen news reports about this in your own communities. These are our friends, neighbors, some of them paid, some of them unpaid. Some are the poll workers who do it year after year for very little money, if any, just simply for love of elections, let alone the ones that actually are staff members at their election offices. And of course, they work every day, every minute to make sure that their elections are free, fair, transparent, auditable, and accountable. I am so glad to be with you all today because as I have been recruiting attorneys to join the Election Official Legal Defense Network, I have found out that the solo practitioner, the GP, and the small law firm audience is our absolute bread and butter. So it is so good to be here. These are you and your colleagues in that space have been the ones that most consistently raise their hands and say, yes, I want to be a part of the network. And then we do reach out to you and your similarly situated attorneys for help. Responsibly say, yes, I will speak to this election official and see what guidance I can offer them to help them deal with their situation, which could be threats and harassment, interference with their official duties on the job could be external, could be internal, unfortunately. There are partisan ideas that drive ideas on how the elections should be run, and the administrators are fending these off. So what we need, and what I'm here to ask you to do today, is to consider perhaps donating some of your time to election officials in your community, because the election officials will contact us and say, I am being routinely slandered by a certain person or by a group of people, and it has to stop. They are, hitting my reputation, and by extension, the reputation of my elections office and everyone who works in it. We end up needing a range of skill sets. It could be litigation in terms of restraining orders or personal protective orders, employment advice, defamation advice, and just general guidance, including, I'm very sorry to say, criminal defense, because in some states, some of these discretionary duties that election officials have carried out for however long, years probably, have been veering into the realm of criminal activity because of legislatures who end up taking some of those duties away, and they make certain things criminal. For instance, sending out a mail ballot to a voter without being specifically asked for it. So I would like to ask you all, I'll be around all day, and I'd like to say, would you please, if you have any questions about how this works, and I know you will because you're lawyers, come and talk to me about it. I would love to see how I can talk to you about how it works and what kind of a time commitment it could be. And our website is EOLDN, Election Official Legal Defense Network.org, where you can look for more information, subscribe to our newsletter. So not only Lorraine's, but mine as well. That'd be wonderful. And just to wrap up, I want to thank you for your time and say, I live in Denver and I worked 9 elections as a poll worker in a row. So I have a very personal sense of what help the legal community can offer, is offering, and we just need more attorneys. So someone like you could end up helping someone like me. And I thank you for your time. Yes, sir. I'm happy to answer your question. Thank you.
Not only are the election officials being for the final vote.
Yes.
I come out of Philadelphia. I remember distinctly the Obama first election. The RNC sent attorneys in from far away Utah, and they were coming in trying to stop people disabled and can't have someone help you vote. All clearly allowed. And we ended up going And first thing we said, you're tall, you're not licensed, go home. And just simple things like that, and so it's really important that you have people that are trained in the election law and legality, to make people have that right to vote.
Yes.
And the other trick is that a lot of times they say, well, we don't have them on the list, provisional vote, that provisional vote may not be out.
Yes, yes. And so there are so very many ways that lawyers can prop up, support, defend the democratic rule of law as it pertains to elections. My ask for you is that there are some election officials who, they do call the police. They do tell their supervisor. They do, they may have certain resources that can help them. They may not. They may not feel like they can trust even their internal, their internal folks, and maybe law enforcement was not able to help them for some reason. And these are people that are very frightened. So they end up needing a lawyer. I would like to go ahead and bring Lauren back up as well, but we can address the question. How would you like to?
Yeah, we'll go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just do.
You can sit there.
Okay.
Yeah. go ahead.
Sure.
Sure.
Please,
Are you?
well, I do want to,
That's
I do want to acknowledge you with your hand up, but what would you like to tell us?
And wrote the path of first legislation in 2002. I volunteered for election protection. I'm Sarah Marshall. I'm from New Mexico, where last year we had several of our legislators both shot up by candidates.
Jesus.
So violence in politics is not new to us. The reason I volunteered for election protection, we can't call the police to come help us because our sheriff was actively doing voter suppression. So we didn't want law enforcement on site. So, yeah, we had, so New Mexico has a different landscape. Let me actually start with my comment. My comment was on, Lauren, number 8 on the report. I just wanted to make a comment that, and I appreciate some limited time, really it was a key issue, but really looking at the jobs, decision and the blueprint laid out, in the dissent, I believe, for dismantling the number protection extended to all sorts of issues, and really looking at that, and it's not just a reproductive rights decision. That is a 14th Amendment decision, and that's really concerning. And so I just wanted to put that out there, and I know that's a key conversation for when we have more time. And then the other thing was on number 6, talking about citizens and and the media oversight. I think that was interesting. Anyway, I went to a program with Senators Daschle and Trott, and they wrote a book that was really interesting about the erosion of the collegial atmosphere in Washington D.C. And I should say I've been a lobbyist like 20 years. I've also lobbied in D.C. and I have staff in all states, and I've been in legislative buildings all across the country. But Daschle and Watt were saying that they used to have a more collegial relationship in DC, and with the advent of the 24/7 news, and now everything is so like there are these little microcosms in the media. Even the feed on your news, your own personal news feed, we're all living in our own little echo chambers. So the information and communication channels that we get are very tailored to the information that we actually want to see. So, and they said that has really impacted the climate, particularly in DC, where people are coming together from all over the nation, and they have to worry about this 24/7 media presence. So yeah, I mean, so how do you balance? I guess my question is, how do you balance media oversight with that sort of media? Like how do you talk about truth in politics? What about truth in media?
Well, yeah, I mean, so you got a lot in there. So it's all important. The media issue is very multifaceted because media now has so much less meaning in a world in which everybody can be their own journalist, right? All you need is an iPhone and developing a platform. So that makes it very complicated to discern what's true and what's not true. we know the expression is very, very true. A lie travels around the world, before the truth is even beginning to emerge. And we have to, that's part of what I think is so important about the civil aspects of the conversation. What can we do in our communities to alert people to do this? How do we tell people that no, it's not, mainstream media, or, when you look for journalistic sources that have to adhere to a standard that's going to be more hopefully reliable than somebody on TikTok, who is a great influencer. But that's a very real problem right now. TikTok as a source of misinformation is a tremendous problem for all of us in the democracy space. So all we can do is continue to be a megaphone for this issue and to continue to shine a light on it and write about it and deal with it. And I go back to, when we talk about the relationships in Congress, I really do truly believe it's because we don't have enough lawyers there who understand how to argue and how to do it civilly. Think about the lawyers you see as commentators and the way they present and the way they talk from whatever party they're from. It's always just more thoughtful than sometimes firebrands who just come out and say stuff from any party that isn't as base. And it just has to say of course, people who aren't lawyers are wonderful. And I'm just saying we need enough people grounded in the rule of law and democratic principles to be serving in government in a variety of roles.
Another question? Over here.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. I practice law in the city, by the way. Disappointed in that situation, and the former president of the Utah State Bar, I wanted those lawyers were reported to the bar. But that wasn't my question. My question was related to a movement that I'm concerned about, where the judiciary heretofore, and still is to a large extent, has been on board against legislative enactments that would depend on those constitutional rights, like right to vote and exercise of the right. There is a movement to change in some respects the face of the judiciary, which is very concerning. It has been recognized that the judiciary has been forward, and for those who are interested in not having those laws overturned, have begun now moving on the judiciary to influence placement judges. Are you aware of that? And is that something you're looking at?
Yes, and we look at that and talk about it among ourselves and deal with it all the time. I mean, activist judges from any perspective. We want judges who judge. We want judges who bring, I criticize, and I've written an article in the ABA Journal a year or two ago, criticizing the points on which the ABA Standing Committee on the federal courts rates judges, because I think they ought to be looking more at factors like judicial temperament and other kinds of factors that really go to the whole perspective of the judge. Forgive the book plug, but in her honor, there is a wonderful chapter by Nancy Gertner, federal court district judge, also now retired, who talked about she actually came to the bench with deeply it would be impossible for her to ever get approved today, because she had such activist roots in terms of her own background as in progressive causes. And she talked about how on the bench, what she was able to do to put her, to put that lens behind and to focus on the issues that matter when you're a judge. And she says it much better than I. She's one of the most eloquent people I know, so I'd urge you to look at that chapter. But one of the things she says is, I'm always suspicious of judges who say, I come to you, a blank slate. I have no background. She said, we all have backgrounds. We all have beliefs. own them and then judge the way you would, you want, operate as you want people to have trust and confidence. So I think it's on, I get alarmed right now when I'm looking at, issues around possible, the questions and concerns of activism on the Supreme Court and cases being funneled through particular courts in the country to get to the Supreme Court. That's not healthy. It's not healthy for our democracy. So we are definitely trying to deal with all of that and figure out how to address it. And I'm happy to talk to you afterwards with any other thoughts.
And make one more comment.
Oh, go ahead.
As a former member of the legislature in our state, long period of time, worked with education, particularly the civic. We've advocated for, along with civic, media literacy to combat misinformation.
That's great.
I would encourage all of us to all go support those kinds of programs. That's going to be the next challenge. In many ways.
I'd love to talk to you after about that.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. I have one final question before we leave, and either one of you can answer it. But I do want to let you know, the first 25 people here received a book, and Ms. Rikleen will be available to sign those books immediately after in the back of the room following the presentation. And also, we're talking to ABA staff, and we're going to have some time available in the hospitality suite for several of the presenters to meet at the round tables up there if you need further information. I see Ms. Trody back there, and we'll set up some space for Ms. Pitha as well in the hospitality suite.
I have to.
Yeah, Ms. Rikleen has to leave, so if you don't talk to her now, you may have to
Just give
talk
me a
to her by
card,
phone, by
follow
Zoom,
up.
whatever your virtual preference is. But my question, and I think this is an important question, and I'm so glad to have both of you here that have gone around the nation galvanizing attorneys, and you both said this, and I agree with it, that some of these issues we're discussing are nonpartisan. They're totally nonpartisan. Preserving democracy is a nonpartisan issue. But the reality is that we are living in a particularly polarized environment, politicized environment, where just phrases such as voter protection, you lose half the audience. Fighting voter fraud, you've lost the other half of the audience. How do you communicate without getting about preserving democracy without getting this visceral reaction to half the people in the room? And I think your experience and what has helped.
Yeah, for me, I just treat the notion that I said about protecting democracy, it doesn't become political because somebody says it's political. I mean, that's sort of like my mantra. I wake up saying it. I have enormous patience for conversations with people about it. But, I think when you believe something so passionately, it's easier to have the discussions. We can't change who we can't change, but I think there are a lot of well-meaning, caring people who want to make a difference. I truly believe that. And I believe in my heart that we have a world of attorneys who are willing to do the work needed to be done to help turn this around and turn these conversations around and do the best we can.
All right, great.
Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you. Go ahead.
Oh, just so quickly, I just wanted to say that when I first started working for this organization last year, our executive director is named David Becker. He's very well known in the election space, so there are a few of you may have already heard of this gentleman. But something he told me very early on is people think that everything that goes on in their own county is perfect and above a reproach. It's the other guy. And at the time I thought, oh, how interesting. I have seen that happen over and over again, because sometimes people are like, oh yeah, my county is shipshape, but I don't know about that county. And it's amazing. And people, some of the threats you've seen reported in the news, like the ones where people were prosecuted and caught, it's like someone in Iowa calling someone in Arizona and leaving threatening voicemails. So when I talk to people, I always just try and reiterate like that courtesy that you extend to your own county, like we're full of those types of counties. So let's just remember that and try not to be so divisive in our initial thoughts about that.
All right. Well, let's give them a round of applause. Thank you.